Today I get to introduce you to Miss Vona Elkins. She raised her family on a horse and cattle farm in Mount Hope, Alabama, and now lives in Moulton, Alabama. She is a writer for Christ to the World Ministries. She's won many awards, and she's written a book titled Ruth. Today she sat down with me and we talked about the story of Ruth, we talked about writing, we talked a little bit about everything. It's a lovely interview and I hope that you enjoy it. So let's check it out. Well, thank you so much for inviting. We're out here in your beautiful home, and your yard and garden is beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be able to sit down and talk to you about this book. You know, I've talked with you so much on the phone and through texting, and it's so nice to finally get face-to-face meet with you. So I'm going to ask you the first obvious question is, how did you start writing?
Well, I guess I started a long time ago when I was younger, doing a few things. I always kept a diary from like 6th grade on. But after I was married, I did things in Sunday school for my children, and then I started a community newsletter in conjunction with a beautification thing that we planned down there.
Yeah.
And so that was just my first little bit there. But I had a dear friend who has now passed on that took me to my first writer's workshop at Samford University. And it just opened up a whole new world to me.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I had some desires to write and maybe use some of the stuff that I had done before, but didn't get that opportunity, but I started thinking in that direction. And so since then I've gone to a lot of writers' conferences and workshops and met with other writers and just learned from them.
Right.
And then I had the opportunity to write for Christ to the World.
Right.
So that was
dramas or plays?
That was dramas, 30-minute dramas, along with Bible studies.
Oh, wow.
Called Hear the Word. And this consisted of 3 people, like a Sunday school class, where one was an agnostic, one was a new Christian, one was like a leader.
Right.
Kind of guided the conversation.
Yeah.
And so I did several of those.
Tell me a little bit about the Christ of the World Ministry.
Okay, Larry Austin is from Texas, is the president. Larry and his choir had gone to Seoul, Korea to do a performance, and while there he went in to meet Dr. Billy Kim, who was the president of Far Eastern Broadcasting, and he's, I think, director was of the Korean Children's Choir, and I believe he was president one time of a Baptist World Alliance. But he was in Dr. Kim's office, and on the wall there was hanging a picture of Dr. Kim and Billy Graham. Dr. Kim had interpreted Billy Graham's sermons when he was there preaching. But he made the remark to Larry that times were changing and we may not always have these opportunities to meet in a church or a stadium or something like this to hear the word preached. And he said, I think we need to work on new avenues too. And of course the media is such a big thing now, and technology, and God is definitely using technology.
Yes.
And he's used this ministry, he's used technology in it. So Larry came up with the idea of using Bible dramas and Bible studies that would be going out over the radio to countries that's never even heard the name Jesus.
Right.
So it's grown to where we're going into parts of 50 countries now.
Wow.
And I will say that it's an all-volunteer ministry. Nobody gets paid for it except in the foreign countries they hire people to come in and do the reading parts or actors or something. But that may be why it's grown so fast. I don't know, because to whom much is given.
Right. Yeah.
Much is required.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
so these people have given of their time without compensation,
That's wonderful, and they're meeting a need. There's obviously that need is there.
And there are people that are having their lives changed. We can't get a lot of feedback because they're in so many different languages. They're translated into the different languages overseas.
Right.
And someday, hopefully, they may be here, but it's so costly to broadcast in the United States.
Right.
But I believe we're going in parts of southern part of the United States where Spanish is another language.
Oh,
so
wow.
those people are hearing it.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's great.
Here's where most of my writing is done. Those are some
Awards?
Yes, this was a Southern Christian Writers fiction that
Oh,
I entered and was placed in that, so it's in this little magazine.
And then you got first place
in fiction writing at the Southern Christian Writers Conference. You're probably familiar with Joe McKeever, and I several of those. Just family pictures in here.
Kind of sweet. Yeah, all these are your lovely family.
Yes, That's my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters and my children. I have 3 children, a son and 2 daughters, and 7 grandchildren now and 7 great-grands.
Wow, oh my goodness.
I know I don't look that old.
No, not at all. Well, I always think it's interesting to see where authors do a lot of the work. I know you said you did a lot of yours, waking up in the middle of the night writing on the pad and paper, but it's interesting also to see where people
put it on the computer though.
Yeah. Well, I know when we were visiting earlier with my husband, you were telling him that you actually started as a singer.
I did.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, that's really where my passion was, and my passion is still in singing, but my voice is not as good as it used to be since I've gotten older. But I started singing, I guess, when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
And in public. And then through my lifetime, I sang in the Hazelwood Quartet where I was in high school, and then I later sang in a ladies trio for about 15 years that I dearly love, but we don't do that anymore.
Right.
And but I still love music, and it's dear to my heart. God uses music to speak to us and to.
Yes, I agree.
He talks about giving us songs in the night.
Right. Yeah.
And hidden riches in secret places. So.
The illustrator, now I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her last name, is Ruth
Bhakti.
Her illustrations are beautifully done. How did you partner up with her?
Ruth's dad came to my church, a little place called Mount Hope, years ago, and when she was a teenager, and he pastored our church there for several years. And so that was my first acquaintance with Ruth. She's one of the most gifted people you'd ever hope to meet, and just precious, and just a good Christian girl, and has so many talents.
Yeah. Well, her illustrations really captured the heart of exactly what I think Ruth would probably look like. It was beautifully done.
I thought so, and I felt fortunate to have her. I intended for her just to do the front cover, and then she volunteered to do the other illustrations too.
Wow.
So she did this at home on her own time.
Oh, goodness.
Just as a gift to me, because I had been her friend for so many years. And,
oh, that's lovely. So why the story of Ruth? Was there anything special about this book?
In writing for Christ of the World, we used 30-minute dramas, and this was to capture the people's attention. These studies go out over Far Eastern Broadcasting and Trans World Radio. And so this Ruth was one that was on the list of things to do. And so Dr. Art Crisco, that does all the editing for Christ of the World, suggested I might want to try that one. I had never written a biblical drama before, just Bible studies and things. So I did, and I enjoyed it. And I mostly got my inspiration at night, kind of broke my sleep pattern.
Right, I can imagine.
I think that's, so I'd keep a pen and a pad by my bed.
Yeah.
And just jot down things, and then of course I did research, because it's so different writing about the Old Testament than it is the New Testament.
Yeah.
To me it's harder. It has to be culturally correct and historically correct and that type of thing. And so.
My next question was, I bet you have to be as accurate as possible when you're dealing with the Old Testament and all their customs and things like that.
Right.
So was that a difficult researching that time period? Or?
Well, I had a lot of resources that I gleaned from. people that I trusted, you know, their writings and things like that. So I went to different commentaries. I didn't particularly read other novels on Ruth, though there's been many, you know, written, but I didn't want to be influenced by someone else's writing on that part, so I did a lot of praying and just let God guide me into what, but I did do a lot of research, yes.
In your adaptation of Ruth, you introduce us to Boaz much sooner than the Bible does, and you help paint a good picture of his relationship with Elimelech and Naomi as family. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
I guess I introduced him earlier because I'm a woman. I want to know why and when and how and all this type of thing, you know. And we're in our scripture, just like 4 verses, I believe, or no more than 5, where Elimelech takes his family, you know, to Moab.
Right.
And so I wanted to hear the emotions and feel the emotions that they felt, and wanted my reader to feel those emotions and to be able to really identify some of their life situations with Ruth's and Naomi's and Elimelech's.
Right. Yeah.
So I just got right into it. And
I loved that. You really just brought us into their world by establishing that relationship off so quickly at the beginning of your story. With doing, not really a book review, but doing an interview with an author, I don't want to give away too much of a story, and yet I'm so excited about being able to talk to the actual person that wrote it, you know. One of the things that I was thinking is that you portray the families leaving Bethlehem as the disobedience that it was. And I'm wondering, because in that disobedience, Ruth came to know God, is it Orpah? Orpah. You know, we could assume maybe she became to know God, and who knows who else with their time of living there in Moab that they influenced to know God. And so it's kind of an example of not an excuse for disobedience, but how God can take our messes and make something for His glory out of it. Was that an important theme to you to put into the book?
Well, it was, because God had forbid them, you know, to have anything to do with Moabite people, actually, you know, because they were pagan and this type thing, and they wanted to keep the Jewish race pure. Maybe sometimes we might make it a little bit too hard on Elimelech, because any of us would want to protect our family, you know, but then again, God tells us to trust Him.
Right.
So I guess, and we could say it was a lack of trust, maybe.
Yeah.
But God's working in the background of these people's lives, just like He does ours today.
Right.
And He sees the story from beginning to end. He can see farther down the road than we can, so.
Because if they had not have gone, Ruth would not, we can suppose, she would not have been in Jesus's, you know, lineage. Yeah.
Yes,
so.
Yeah. I guess we got a story there too of Naomi was a good mother-in-law, even though she didn't approve of that marriage.
Right. Yes.
And so out of that, Ruth came to love her, see, and.
There's so many things that you can draw out of the story, between the relationships, between the hardships and loss. And I truly enjoyed and felt connected to Naomi, and how you portrayed her deep grief over her loss of her husband, her sons, and even her homeland. Did you draw from any personal experience when you were portraying Naomi's grief?
Yes, I'm sure I did. You know, we're taught to write what you know. I've lived some of that to an extent. I've never lost a child, God forbid. But I did lose my husband to cancer, and so I know those emotions that I wrote about.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 3 or 4 year illness.
Yeah.
And so I pulled from that, and I could just really get back into Naomi's life by rethinking and refilling my own.
Right.
And,
well, you know, when Naomi returned back, you know, she was like, "Don't call me Naomi. You know, I left away full. I've come back empty. And call me," I think it was Mara.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I always thought, and you know, I judged her too quickly. I always thought she's just being a little bit of a drama queen there. But it's, you portrayed it in her sense of her grief. She really felt just absolutely empty. What more do I have left?
Well, I think we would all feel that way. I think that's a natural thing that would happen if all those things happened to us. You know, just all right close together. And,
exactly.
And to a certain extent, I lost my mom and dad and my brother to brain cancer within a period of like 4 or 5 years. So, but we all have losses, you know.
Right.
And,
yes.
God sustains us through it if we turn to Him.
You spoke a little bit about Ruth and Naomi's relationship, and that's one of my favorite takeaways from the story, is how they really loved and supported each other through it. I'm curious, what is your favorite takeaway from the whole story of Ruth?
I think it's a story of hope. It's a story of redemption, of course, because Boaz is a representation of Christ.
Right.
He's our kinsman, redeemer, and that's what he was to Ruth. But I think, you know, just that God's a God in the good times, and He's also a God in the hard times, and His faithfulness.
Right. Yes.
He's promised to never leave us nor forsake us. That would be one takeaway, and even for young girls that might want to read the book, it might make them think about when they get to choose a partner, someone that's a godly person, someone that's honest and caring, and like Boaz was,
right,
rather than some of those things that
right.
we get so excited about, you know, in our
right.
younger years and stuff. So
I think, and I had shared with you that I'm on Coffee Talk, Andy, and I had talked a little bit about it, and I think that it's a good takeaway to think about the relationship that Naomi had with her 2 daughter-in-laws, that they would leave their own families and country. So they had such a love for her. And I think, you know, I'm a mother-in-law. I have a daughter-in-law, and so I think about how I would want to instill that kind of relationship with her, and that takes work, wouldn't you say?
It does.
And it speaks to the testimony of who Naomi must have been.
It does, because so many times mother-in-laws get a bad rap, you know.
Yes,
and
yeah.
But again, like you said, her response, I think, to Ruth is what created a desire in Ruth to know this God that Naomi prayed to.
Exactly.
It was the God that Naomi knew. And that's really, she loved her mother-in-law, but I think it was a tug on Ruth's heart that she wanted her to know this God.
I love that, because, you know, it's and you highlight that it's almost as if she's saying, if I stay here, I can't have your God, and I love God, so I'm choosing to stay with Him, which is that's just a beautiful part of the story.
I think that when Ruth made that decision, and her reason was getting to know God, that's when she was grafted into that family. And so that's why she was accepted by Boaz. And
now I love I don't want to give away any of this story. I want people to go read it, because you really do, you bring these characters to life. I mean, you introduced us to Ruth and Orpah when they were young, and Milon and Kelon, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. You know, you introduced us to the story that the Bible, you know, doesn't allow us to go there. So you do in this book, and so it's kind of like we could just enter into their story and really they become alive to us. I want to talk to you a little bit about the writing process. did these characters come alive with you during the day? I mean, did you?
They did.
I don't know if I asked that right or not, but
as I researched, and too, like I say, I get most of my inspiration in the nighttime.
Right.
So my ideas started building and this kind of thing, and I don't do a outline or anything like that. Some writers do, but I just sit down at the computer. I say a prayer for God to lead me and guide me in this process, and it just flows, seemingly. And I didn't know how it was going to end when I started the book. I told someone I was anxious to finish it so I'd know how it ended.
Right.
But anyway, it was just a process as I went along.
Yeah.
And,
well, it's beautifully written, and it is a beautiful story. And as you had shared a little bit with me earlier today, we were talking about you'd love to see it in a movie, and so would I. I would love to see this, as a movie. So that brings me to another thing. I noticed in the back of the book there's some discussion questions. Did you envision this book to be used for individuals and groups as a Bible study?
I guess my thought was that to use the questions just to ponder on the individual that was reading it. So it would make them want to go deeper.
Right.
But God has opened some doors for me to go into churches, senior citizens groups, and share my writing story. And He's opened some doors for me to go to women's groups and speak. And actually, there have been several Bible studies that everybody in the class would buy a book, and then they'd study it together as a Bible for about 6 weeks study.
Oh, that's great. Now, are you still available to do book signings and come in and speak with groups?
Yes, yes, I am. I
well, we'll put that in the discussion below so that you can see how to contact you, and we'll also put a link in there so they can purchase the book, because it is on Amazon.
Yes,
is that correct? Okay.
When I speak to those groups like that, I do a little short skit on Ruth.
Oh, that's so neat.
I dress like her, and I sing the song that's in the book of Ruth, Whither Thou Goest, I Will Go. And then I share my writing experiences. And
oh, well, that's wonderful. It's a whole presentation then.
Right,
yeah, that is great. That is great.
Not every time, but where the situation calls for that type thing.
Right. So are you going to write another book? What's next for you?
I don't know if I'd live long enough to or not.
Oh, come on, you're in the prime right now. I can see it.
I have thought of doing a compilation of maybe 3 stories together, all on women. And I have 2 started. I don't usually write 2 at a time, but this is something I'd already done a long time ago. And I don't really know what they would be. One is on the woman who was bent double with an infirmity that Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and the Jews, got angry. And so I'm thinking about that one.
Yes.
It would be entitled probably He Raised Me Up. Possibly Abigail.
Yes.
You had mentioned one to me earlier.
Well, I mentioned the Esther, and then the lady at the well.
Right.
I think that those would be. Yeah. I would love to see those through your eyes. That your writing voice is what it is.
And I thought about Rahab, even Boaz's mom.
Yes. Yeah.
But carry that lineage on. So.
Yeah, I think. I'm already getting excited about it. So you got to do it. So.
I had a lot of help along the way. People that encouraged me.
Oh, wonderful.
Fellow writers.
Well, and you even have the dog Shadow in the book. So I was like, there's so many characters. They're so, it's just so good, especially for someone who reads the book of Ruth and you hunger for more. Have you ever read a book and at the end of it, you're just like, you don't want to say goodbye to those characters?
I might add this. If you noticed in my book, I use the scripture from the Bible.
Yes.
And then the fiction part, under there. And we don't change God's word in writing. But in Christian fiction, you can make an allowance for where there's blank spaces. You might call it writing in the cracks,
Right.
where it could have happened,
Yes.
unless
Yes.
God's Word said it happened a different way. So,
Right.
So that's what I've done, and felt like that would make a better understanding. And
I completely agree. Yes, I think it's very, I could tell that God definitely spoke to you in writing this.
when my husband passed away, I stayed on in my home on the farm for about 10 years, and then I moved to Moulton. Got in another church, which I was familiar with because my daughters were going there, but we were studying a little study down at my old church. The ladies group was studying a little study, and God just spoke to me. We studied the prayer of Jabez, where he says, enlarge my territory,
Yeah.
So with that in mind, and then my verse for the year, I've always chosen a verse of the year instead of a New Year's resolution. I'll just choose a new Bible verse.
Yeah.
And God brings that to my mind during the year. So I had chosen the verse from, I think, Jeremiah 33:3. Call unto me, and I will answer you, and show you great and mighty things which you've never known before. And so I think God has shown me some things that I have never known before in a different way from what I would have expected.
Right.
And I'm just grateful for His grace.
Yes.
And because this is a story of starting over again, and we all make mistakes, and so God is a God of second chances, and that's what He gave Ruth,
Right.
and even Naomi, and so.
Well, I definitely think that you're an inspiration, especially to me, but to lots of women. You're still putting out things. You're saying my life isn't over, as God's still using me, and I'm still gonna put things out there to help edify and grow others. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me a little bit about Ruth. You spent the day with us, so Jeff and I have had a wonderful, it's been a blessing to be able to get to know you.
It's been a pleasure for me and a blessing for me, and I'm just grateful to have new friends, and
I know,
want
so I
to
was
welcome
gonna say,
you back. It's just a bonding there, seems
exactly.
like, isn't it?
I can see why your granddaughters call you the friend catcher. I mean, that is the perfect title for
Thank
you.
Thank you.
So, well, I can't wait to see more books. And so definitely let us know, and we'll come back again and do some more videos about your books.
Thank you.